Hello, listener. The fact you hear this means you're alive. If you're new here, consider subscribing and comment below where you're listening from. Let's begin the story. The deed was 38 pages long, and the village had 4 buildings still standing. That was what the listing photos didn't show. The photos showed 12 buildings. By the time I drove up the switchback in October, 8 of them were piles of cedar and tin with sapling birches growing through the roofs. I sat in the truck a long time before I got out. My wife Annika was asleep against the window with her cheek mashed flat. Our daughter Mira was in the back seat reading a paperback she had already read 3 times. The dog was panting. I had spent our savings and the savings of a dead aunt on a place called Ostvik that had been empty for 12 years. Ostvik isn't on most maps. It sits in a hanging valley about 19 kilometers northeast of Storuman in Swedish Lapland. Up a forest road, the county stopped plowing in 2011. It was a copper assay camp in the 1890s, then a sawmill village, then a small forestry cooperative. Then in 2012, the last family left because the school in Storuman closed the satellite bus route and there was no work. 12 years of frost heave and snow load and squirrels. The realtor in Umeå had told me on the phone in a careful voice that the property would require sweat. I had told her I was a sweat sort of man. I was not. I was a mid-career drainage and culvert inspector for the Trafikverket, the Swedish Transport Administration, and my hands were soft from holding clipboards. But I knew water. That ended up mattering more than anything else. We had bought Ostvik for 2 reasons, and only one of them was honest. The honest reason was that Annika had been diagnosed in March with a slow autoimmune disease that her rheumatologist said would not kill her, but would, over years, take the use of her hands and then her hips. She had said one night in the kitchen in Sundsvall that she wanted to stop pretending the city was alive. The dishonest reason was that I had been quietly afraid of the news since spring, not afraid the way people are afraid of a bad election. Afraid the way a man who inspects culverts is afraid when the pre-rain inspection finds nothing wrong and the rain comes anyway. There had been an incident in Belarus in April that the papers called an industrial accident, and quarantines in 2 Russian oblasts in June that were lifted too quickly. A colleague of mine named Petter, who worked the Norrland tunnels, had said in August over coffee that his brother in the army had been recalled from leave and would not say why. I had not told Annika about Petter. I had told her about the valley and the 4 standing buildings and the spring-fed pond and the access road that nobody plowed. We arrived October 11th. Mira was 11. The dog, a brown mutt named Toffel, was 9, a bad guard but good company. Annika walked the perimeter with me that first afternoon, slowly, with a cane she had not used in front of neighbors back in Sundsvall, but used freely here because there were no neighbors. We counted. 1 main house, 2-story, log on a stone foundation. Roof needs work, but holds. 1 barn, half fallen, salvageable timber. 1 smithy with a brick forge inside, intact, doors gone. 1 byre with a sod roof grown into a meadow. The other 8 footprints in the meadow were where the school had been, and the chapel, and the family's houses, and the cooperative store. Foundations only. Wild raspberry coming up between the stones. It's smaller than the pictures, Annika said. It is. I love it, she said, and I understood she was deciding to. That first night we slept on mattresses on the kitchen floor because the upstairs bedrooms had a smell I would need 3 days to chase out of the timber. Mira was asleep in 20 minutes. Annika lay awake longer than she let on. I lay awake the longest. I listened to the house. A house empty for 12 years has a sound. It is the sound of small animals taking it for granted that nobody will come. They scratch in the walls without caution. They run along the rafters without lowering their feet. By morning, every mouse in Osvik knew we were there, and they did not seem to mind. I minded. I set traps the next day, 12 of them, baited with peanut butter from a jar I had bought in Storuman the night before. I caught 7 mice in the first week. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that the apocalypse, when it came, did not look like an apocalypse. It looked like a man on his knees in a cold kitchen, resetting mouse traps, listening to his wife laugh upstairs at something his daughter had said. I will tell you what saved us, in the order it saved us, because the order matters. It was not courage. It was the spring, the stove, the cellar, the road, and one phone call from a man named Leonard I had never met. The spring first. Behind the main house, 20 meters up the slope, there was a stone spring house the size of a closet. A man named Olaf Bergquist had built it in 1907, his initials carved into the lintel. Inside, a granite basin filled by a pipe that came out of the hillside above. The water was 4 degrees Celsius year-round by my thermometer, and tested clean when I sent a sample to the lab in Umeå the week we arrived. That spring had not stopped running in 117 years. It did not care about pumps or grids or fuel. It came out of the rock at about 11 liters per minute and went, by gravity, through a stone channel under the house and out into the pond. The pond drained into a creek. The creek drained into the Umeälven eventually. Water flowed through Ostvik whether or not anybody lived there. That was the first thing I understood as an inspector and not a homeowner. We had not bought a house. We had bought a position on a watershed. The stove next, a Jotul cast-iron cook stove in the kitchen. Norwegian, 1962, in working condition because cast iron does not care about 12 years of vacancy if the chimney is sound. I climbed the roof on the second day and found the chimney cracked at the flashing but the flue clay liner intact. I patched the flashing with roofing cement I had bought in Storuman and ran a flue brush down it and lit a test fire of birch from the wood pile the last family had left in 2012. It burned hot and dry because cedar shake roofs leak in odd ways and that woodshed had stayed dry. We had heat. We had a cooktop. We had, in October at 65 degrees north latitude, the only thing that mattered. The cellar. Under the main house, accessed by a trap in the kitchen floor, there was a root cellar dug into the hillside, mortared stone walls, dirt floor, 6.5 degrees in October, and probably 2 degrees in February. The last family had left jars in it. Most were burst from freeze cycles, but the shelves were sound, and I spent the third day cleaning glass and lye and mouse. Annika sat on the kitchen floor with the trap open and handed me empty jars to throw and full ones to inspect. We found 1 jar of lingonberries from 2011 still sealed and still good. She ate a spoonful and cried, and I did not ask why, because I knew why. It was that someone had put up lingonberries in 2011 expecting to eat them in 2012, and had instead packed a moving truck and left the jar. That is what 12 empty years looks like when you taste it. The road. The access road to Osvik comes off the E12 north of Storuman, then 23 kilometers of forestry track, 2 stream crossings, 1 wooden bridge that I would not have driven a loaded truck across without inspecting, and a final climb, the last 4 kilometers, that any unmaintained vehicle would struggle with after the first snow. I drove it 3 times in those first 3 weeks, hauling supplies from Storuman. Each time I drove it, I did what I do for a living. I inspected. I noted the bridge stringers. I noted the washouts. I noted with a kind of professional pleasure I am ashamed of that a downed spruce at kilometer 17 would, with very little additional effort, make the road completely impassable to anyone who didn't know the bypass through the old logging cut. I made a private list of which culverts I could pull and which trees I could drop. I told myself I was being thorough. The phone call. On October 22nd, 11 days after we arrived, the landline rang. We had a landline because cell coverage in the valley was a single bar on a north-facing windowsill, and I had paid Talia to reconnect the copper line that ran up the old utility pole route. The phone was a green rotary in the kitchen. It rang 4 times before I picked it up because I had genuinely forgotten the line was hot. Bergquist House, I said. It was what the operator had labeled the listing. Is this Matthias' home? Yes. This is Lennart Sundqvist. I live at Granliden, about 14 kilometers south of you, off the same road. I saw your truck come through. I wanted to say hello before the road closes. I had not known there was anybody else on that road. The realtor had told me Ostvik was the last property up the valley. She had not been wrong, exactly. Lennart was off the road, on a spur I had not noticed, in a hunting cabin he had inherited from his father and rebuilt in the 1990s. He was 63, retired from the SJ Railways, lived alone except in moose season. He had a CB radio and a generator, and 300 liters of diesel, and, he mentioned almost as an aside, a son in the Hemvärnet, the Swedish Home Guard. We talked for 40 minutes that first call. He gave me the names of 2 other people on the valley road, both summer cabins, both empty by now. He told me which streams flooded in spring and where the road washed out and which year the bridge had been redecked. He asked me eventually why we had moved up in October instead of summer. I gave him the honest answer about Annika's diagnosis and not the dishonest answer about the news. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "Your wife will do well here in winter. The cold is cleaner than the city. My wife had MS. We came up here in '94. She had 12 good years." I had been holding the receiver between my shoulder and my ear, looking out the kitchen window at Mira in the meadow, trying to teach the dog to fetch a pine cone. I closed my eyes for a second and said, "Thank you. I appreciate that." "Call me if anything goes wrong," Lennart said. "I'll come up. I have a UAZ. It does the road in any month." I hung up and stood at the window a while. Mira had given up on the pine cone. She was on her back in the dead October grass with Toffel lying half on top of her, both of them looking at the sky. Annika had come out onto the porch with a mug in her hand. She watched them too. I had not heard her come down the stairs. She said, without turning around, "Who was that?" "A neighbor. We have a neighbor, apparently." She thought about that. Then she said, "Good. Invite him for dinner sometime." I said I would. I did not that autumn. There was no time, and then there was no possibility. I want to be honest about something. I had not yet told Annika that I was afraid. I had told her we had moved for her. That was true, but I had also been quietly stockpiling, in a manner I had concealed from her by parceling it across multiple storeroom and trips. By October 25th I had 90 kilos of flour in food-grade buckets in the cellar, 60 kilos of dry beans and rice, 40 liters of cooking oil, 2 cases of canning lids, salt enough for several years, sugar enough for 1, 2 new chainsaw chains and a spare bar, 80 liters of 2-stroke premix, 300 liters of diesel in a tank behind the barn, 450 rounds for a hunting rifle I had owned for 16 years and used twice, a case of antibiotics I had bought legally in Storuman because a country pharmacist there sold them without much fuss to a man with a forestry property, and, in a locked box under the kitchen floor, my late aunt's Walther PPK from her career as a customs officer in Malmö, which I had not declared to the rifle license registry because in Sweden you cannot easily inherit a handgun, and I had not wanted to give it up. I do not say this to brag. I say it because every one of those items mattered later, and I want you to understand that I did not stockpile because I knew. I stockpiled because I was scared in a way I could not name, and I did the only thing a culvert inspector knows how to do, which is to assume the rain is coming. The rain came on November 3rd. Not literal rain. A news bulletin. I had a small shortwave radio I had bought because Leonard had recommended it, and I listened to the SRP4 Vasterbotten broadcast every evening at 7 while I made dinner. On November 3rd, the 7 o'clock broadcast was preempted by an emergency message from the Myndigheten för samhällsskydd och beredskap, the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency, which told residents of Stockholm, Göteborg, Malmö, and Uppsala to remain in their homes until further notice due to a public health incident. The message was repeated in Swedish, English, Finnish, and Arabic. It did not use the word that I knew by then it meant. It did not need to. I had been reading between lines for 2 months. Annika was at the kitchen table cutting up apples for drying. Mira was upstairs. I turned the radio down and Annika looked at me and said, "What is it?" I told her. She did not cry. She did not panic. She said, "How long have you known this was coming?" "I didn't know," I said. "I was afraid." "Since when?" "Since August." She put the knife down. "Matthias." "I know." "You should have told me." "I know." She looked at her hands, which were already a little stiff at the knuckles from the autoimmune thing, and then she looked up and said, "What do we do now?" That is the moment I want to be honest about, because in 20 years of marriage I had never loved her more than in the 4 seconds between her question and her next sentence, which was, "Don't answer that. We do what we were going to do. We make this place a place to live." We did not have a panic. We had a meeting. Annika and I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and we made a list. The list had 4 columns: water, heat, food, defense. Under defense I wrote in small letters, road. Annika read the list upside down and said, "Add people." I added people. She said, "Leonard first." I said, "He'll come." We told Mira the next morning, sitting on the stove bench with the dog between us. Mira was 11, but she was an 11 who had read 3 Tove Jansson novels twice each and understood things. She asked 2 questions. The first was whether her grandparents in Sundsvall were okay. I said I didn't know, and that I would try to find out, and I would tell her the truth when I knew. The second question was whether the dog could sleep on her bed now. I said yes. Annika said yes harder. That afternoon I called the Sundsvall number from the rotary in the kitchen. It rang and rang. I tried Annika's mother's mobile. Voicemail. I tried my father, who lived alone in a flat in Hanosund. He answered on the 6th ring. He sounded older than he had 2 weeks before. He said he had bread and tinned fish, and the heat was still on. He said he had been sleeping with the door bolted because someone had been screaming in the courtyard the night before, and the police had not come. I told him to come north. He said the buses had stopped. I told him to take a taxi. He laughed and said no taxi was going to drive him 300 kilometers in this. I told him I would come for him. He said very firmly, "No, you stay with your women. I am 81. I have had my run. Take care of Mira." He hung up before I could argue. I called back. He did not pick up. I called back 4 more times that week. He never picked up again. I do not know what happened to him. I have told myself it was peaceful, and I have told myself it was not peaceful, and neither version brings him back, so I have stopped telling myself anything, and just kept the fact of him in a quiet room in my head where I visit him on his birthday. I drove to Storuman on November the 5th. It was the last time I drove out of the valley for 9 months. The town was not panicked, but it was wrong. The co-op was open, but the meat counter was empty, and the dry goods aisle had been picked through. The clerk at the hardware store, a man named Henrik, whose name I had learned over 4 prior visits, was selling things for cash only and not making eye contact. I bought what I could. 2 more cases of canning jars, a second roll of stovepipe, a kerosene lantern, and 2 gallons of kerosene, a hand-cranked grain mill I had been meaning to buy for 2 weeks, and because Henrik mentioned it under his breath, a small VHF marine radio he had been keeping under the counter, which would let me reach Lennet even if the landlines went down. On the drive back, I dropped the spruce at kilometer 17 with the chainsaw. I told myself I would clear it in spring. I did not clear it in spring. I have not cleared it. It is still there. The landline went down on November 9th. The grid stayed up until November 11th, and then it flickered for 2 days, and then it went, and the lights in the kitchen did not come back on. The shortwave still worked on batteries. The shortwave told us, in fragments, that Stockholm was no longer reporting, that the Øresund bridge to Denmark had been closed by the Danish side, that the Norwegian border had been closed by the Norwegian side, and then in late November, that the Riksdag had relocated to Östersund and was issuing instructions through SR Norland on a schedule. The instructions were sensible and useless. Conserve fuel, boil water. Do not approach strangers. Report sightings. Sightings of what was not specified. It did not need to be. We did not see one for a long time. That is the strange thing about Ostervik. The first dead person I saw on January 22nd, and he was already frozen, and he had walked 19 kilometers up a forestry road in temperatures that should have killed a living man twice over. He was face down in the snow about 40 meters from the barn. I will come back to him. Before that, there were 11 weeks of work. I want to tell you what those weeks were like because they were the foundation of everything that came after, and because if you have ever wondered whether you could do this, the answer is that you could, but it would not look the way you think. We rose at 6:30 in the dark and lit the stove and made coffee from beans I was rationing at 1 cup a day per adult. We ate oats with lingonberry preserve and powdered milk. Mira did schoolwork from a curriculum Annika had brought, 2 hours every morning at the kitchen table, while I worked outside. I cut wood. I cut so much wood that my back, which had not been used for real labor since my 20s, hurt in places I had forgotten existed. I learned, again, the right angle to swing a maul and the difference between birch and spruce and aspen for stove heat. Birch is the best. Spruce throws sparks. Aspen burns like paper and is good for kindling. I had learned this as a boy and had forgotten it and remembered it now with a kind of shame and gratitude. I made the barn solid. I sisted the broken rafters and re-roofed the south side with tin I had brought from Storuman in October. I moved the wood pile into the barn so it would be dry and so the snow would not bury it. I built a second outhouse closer to the main house because the existing one was 30 meters away and Annika's hips were going to make that 30 meters a problem in February. I worked on the spring house. I cleaned the basin. I traced the inlet pipe back into the hill as far as I could and confirmed it was a black iron pipe, not lead, set in 1907 and apparently planning to outlive me. I built a small, insulated box around the outlet pipe inside the kitchen so it would not freeze when the kitchen was cold, because the kitchen would, at some point, be cold. I tested the gravity-fed flow at the indoor tap and found it adequate. I dug a pit latrine deeper than the old one, lined the top half with cedar planks, and built a small shed over it with a vent pipe and a layer of wood ash in a bucket beside the seat. I dug a second shallow pit for kitchen waste compost. I dug a trench from the kitchen sink drain that went 40 meters down to a French drain in the woods, because the old sink drain went nowhere I could trace, and I do not like drainage I cannot trace. This is what I mean about the profession being the survival engine. I did not know how to fight. I did not know how to organize people. I knew in my bones that water moves downhill, and that anything you do not understand the path of will surprise you in the worst possible season. So I traced every pipe in every drain in Ostvik before the first hard freeze. I drew a map. I put the map in a folder labeled Water in Annika's handwriting, and I taped a copy to the inside of the cellar door. I made a mistake in that first month I want to tell you about because it almost cost us. I assumed the chimney patch I had done in October would hold. It did not. On December 1st, in a snowstorm, the flashing lifted and snow melt came down inside the chimney chase and ran along a beam and dripped onto the back of the stove. I noticed it because the stove hissed in a way it should not have hissed. I climbed the roof in the dark with a headlamp, in the snow, with a hot kettle of pitch I had warmed on the stove, and reflashed the chimney with a folded sheet of copper I cut from a roll I had bought without knowing why in October. Annika held the bottom of the ladder. The wind was 22 meters per second by the anemometer on the porch post. I came down with both hands burned through my gloves, and a lesson I have never forgotten. The lesson is that the patch you do in fair weather is not the patch you trust in foul weather. Do it right the first time, or you will do it twice, and the second time will be at night. Lennart came up on December 2nd on a snowmobile because the road was already snowed in past his cabin. He brought a tin of coffee, a bag of moose jerky his nephew had made before the collapse, and news. He sat in our kitchen for 3 hours. He had spoken on his CB to a man in Tarnaby and a woman in Wilhelmina and his son once on the Hemvarnet's still-functioning regional repeater. The son had told him 3 things. 1. The cities were gone. 2. The dead walked in cold weather, slower, but did not stop walking. 3. The Hemvarnet had withdrawn to defensive nodes in the inland and was no longer attempting recovery operations in the south. The son had asked Lennart, in coded language, whether he had a place to retreat to. Lennart had said he did. The son had said he would come north if he could. He had not come. We talked that afternoon about what Ostvik was. Letart, who had been a railway dispatcher for 31 years, looked at my map and at my notebook and at the 4 standing buildings, and he said, "You have a redoubt. You did not know it, but you bought a redoubt." "How so?" "1 road in. You've already cut it. 1 valley surrounded by ridge. 1 water source nobody can poison without coming up your road. Heat from forest you can replenish forever. You are 23 kilometers from the nearest town and the road is unplowed. You have a wife and a daughter and a dog. You have a hunting rifle and food for 1 winter and a man 14 kilometers down the road who will come if you call. You are in better shape than 99% of people alive in Sweden right now." "I bought it for my wife," I said. "I know," he said, "but you also bought it for this." I did not answer. He stood up to leave at 4. The light was already gone. He stopped at the door and said, "Matthias, the dead are not the real problem. The real problem is the living who will come up the road in February when their food is gone. You need to think about that now, while it is still December." I said I would. He said, "I will help." He left. The snowmobile sound dwindled. Annika came out of the bedroom where she'd been listening through the wall and sat down at the table and said, "He's right." "I know. What do we do?" I told her my list. I had been making a list. The list said, clear sight lines from the main house in 3 directions. Build a sleeping platform in the cellar for emergency retreat. Install interior bars on the ground floor windows. Cache 1 week of food, water, and fuel in the smithy as a fallback. Identify and pre-clear an evacuation route over the ridge to the next valley north. Establish a daily radio schedule with Leonard. Agree on a code word that meant "come now." Annika listened to the whole list. Then she said, "Add one more thing." "What?" "If someone comes who is desperate but not dangerous, we help them." I looked at her. "I mean it," she said. "If we don't, this place isn't worth saving." I added it to the list. I did not know then how much that line was going to cost. The first dead man came on January 22nd. I had been outside splitting wood. Toffel, the dog, was sniffing at something at the edge of the meadow and would not come when I called, which was unusual. I walked over with the maul in my hand and saw the shape in the snow. He had walked in from the road. His tracks were visible for the last 40 meters and then disappeared into the woods. He had walked, by my reading of the tracks, slowly and with a strange foot drag for a long time. His clothes were a hiker's clothes, a green Fjallraven jacket and snow pants and boots. His face, when I rolled him over with the maul handle, was gray and his eyes were open and his mouth was open and his lower jaw moved very slightly when the air moved. He was frozen but not entirely dead in the way I had been raised to understand dead. I will tell you what I did because it is important. I went back to the house. I told Annika to take Mira into the cellar and to bolt the trap. I told her not to come up until I called. She did. I went to the gun cabinet and took the rifle in a single round. I walked back out to the figure in the snow. I shot him in the head from 2 meters. The sound was extremely loud in the cold air. The body did not move again. I dragged him by his ankles, with the dog whining behind me, 300 meters up the slope behind the spring house to the old foundation pit of the cooperative store, which I had previously identified as the place I would put a body if I had to. I rolled him in. I covered him with snow. I marked the spot with a cairn of 3 stones. I walked back to the house. I washed my hands with lye soap until they hurt. I called down through the trap. Annika came up. Mira came up. The dog put her head on Mira's knee. I did not eat dinner that night. Annika ate beside me without saying anything. After Mira was in bed, she put her hand on my wrist on the kitchen table and said, "You did it right. I shot a man. You shot something that used to be a man. You did it right. You took him away. You did not let Mira see. You are still you. Am I?" She did not answer that. She put her forehead against my temple, and we sat like that for a while. I logged him in a notebook the next morning. Entry 1. Male, approximately 40 years old, hiker's clothing, frozen, ambulatory at Discovery. Dispatched January 22nd, interred Foundation Pit C. I did not know when I wrote it that I would log 41 entries in that book over the next 18 months. I numbered them. I noted what they wore. I noted when I could see it what kind of person they had been. I do not look at the book often now, but I kept it because Annika said one night that if we were going to do this, we had to remember each one as a person, even when they were no longer a person. She was right. I have not always been able to. I have tried. January and February passed. We saw, in those 2 months, 4 more dead. All 4 had walked up the road. All 4 were frozen half. All 4 were dispatched without harm to us. All 4 were logged and interred. The 5th, in late February, was a woman. She had been wearing a nurse's uniform under a heavy coat. That one I did not log dispassionately. I wrote her entry, and then I wrote a paragraph below it about her hands, which were a nurse's hands, with short, clean nails even after God knows how long, and I put the notebook away and did not open it for a week. In early March, the first living visitor came. He came on foot, on the road, in the late afternoon of March 8th. Toffel barked from inside the house, which was the signal I had asked Annika to listen for. I was in the barn. I came out with the rifle and saw him at the bend in the road, 200 meters down, walking with a limp and a backpack. He stopped when he saw me. He raised both hands. "I'm not sick," he shouted in Swedish. "I have a daughter with me. She's behind me by the bridge. She can't walk anymore. Please." I told him to stay where he was. I told him to take off his jacket slowly and his sweater and to show me his arms and his neck. He did. Even at 200 meters, with the binoculars I keep on the porch, I could see he was thin and exhausted, but not bitten, not gray, not wrong. He was about my age. His name, he said, was Johan. His daughter, whose name was Lena, was 9. They had walked from a village outside Lycksele over the course of 19 days. They had eaten the last of their food 4 days ago. Annika came out onto the porch behind me. She had heard. She said quietly, "Matthias." "I know." "Quarantine in the smithy. 2 weeks. We feed them through the door." "I know." I called down to Johan that he could come to the smithy, slowly, with his hands visible. I told him I would meet his daughter at the bridge with the snowmobile. He started to cry. I told him not to cry yet. I told him we would see in 2 weeks whether crying was warranted. I drove the snowmobile down the road. The child was sitting on a stump at the bridge. She was wearing a pink hat. She did not look up when I approached. I had to lift her onto the snowmobile, and she weighed almost nothing. She fell asleep against my back on the 4-kilometer ride up. I had not held a sleeping child since Mira was 6. It is a particular weight. I had forgotten it. We put them in the smithy. The smithy had a working forge, which I had restored in November, and which now served as a heat source, and a chimney, and a dirt floor we had covered with cedar boughs and old wool blankets. I had stocked it as a fallback shelter, which now became a quarantine. We fed them through a slot in the door for 14 days. Annika cooked. Mira drew pictures and pushed them under the door. I checked temperatures with a thermometer on a stick. They did not get sick. On day 15, we let them out. Johan had been a high school music teacher in Lycksele. His wife had died in November. He told us the story in pieces, over weeks. He did not tell Lena any of it, and we did not either, and Lena did not ask. Lena took to Mira the way a younger sister takes to an older one. Within a week, they had a secret language involving knocks on the floor. Annika cried about it once, in our bed, when she thought I was asleep. Johan was useful. He was not handy in the way I was handy, but he had patience, and he learned, and his back was younger than mine. By April, he was splitting wood faster than I was. He had also, it turned out, played accordion before the world ended, and there was a button accordion in the loft of the main house that had belonged to the last family. He found it and tuned it in an afternoon, and that spring there was music in Ostvik for the first time since 2012. Mira learned to dance a polska on the kitchen floor in stocking feet. Annika watched from the bench. I watched Annika. I want to tell you something now that I have not told anyone, because this is the part of the story that matters. In April, Annika got worse. Not from her autoimmune disease exactly. From something the cold and the work and the worry made of her autoimmune disease. Her hands stiffened. Her right hip began to lock up in the mornings. She had brought a 6-month supply of her medication and it was running out. There was no pharmacy. There was no Stockholm. There was no rheumatologist. She had perhaps 8 weeks of pills left when we counted in mid-April. I did not tell her I knew. She did not tell me she knew. We both knew. We each pretended for the other. In May, on the Marine VHF, a man calling himself Doctor Ekstrom from a clinic in Wilhelmina that had become a regional aid post began broadcasting at 1900 hours on Tuesdays and Fridays, taking medical requests, offering trades in medicine for fuel or food or skilled work. Wilhelmina was 96 kilometers south of us by road, less by the old logging roads if you knew them. Leonard knew them. I called Leonard on the CB on a Tuesday in May and asked him whether he would take a trip with me. He said yes before I finished asking. Annika found out because she found out everything. She came to me in the barn on the evening before we were to leave and said, "Don't. Annika, don't, please. The pills are not worth it. You are. If something happens to you, what happens to us? To Mira." I had thought about this. I had thought about little else for 2 weeks. I had Johan now. Johan would stay. Johan would protect them if I did not come back. Lennart's son had, in the meantime, finally come north and was with Lennart at Gran Leiden, and would come up the valley if Johan called on the CB. We had built a small network. I was, for the first time since November, replaceable. I told her that. She said, "You are not replaceable to me." I said, "I am going." She said, "Then come back." I came back, but not before I made a mistake I do not want to be remembered for. I will tell you anyway, because the rule of this record is that I do not get to leave out the parts where I failed. Leonard and I took his UAZ and a jerrycan of diesel and a rifle each and a sealed envelope of barter goods. We left before dawn. By midday we were past Storuman on a forestry road Leonard knew that bypassed the town. At kilometer 53 south, in a stretch of forest between 2 clear cuts, we came around a bend and there was a car in the road. A red Volvo wagon, doors open. No bodies. Leonard slowed the UAZ. I had the rifle up. We looked at it for a long time. "Drive around," I said. "I want to look," he said. "There might be fuel." "Drive around." He stopped the UAZ 10 meters short of the Volvo and got out, leaving the engine running. I got out on my side and covered him. He walked to the Volvo and looked in. He waved me forward. I came up. The keys were in the ignition. The fuel gauge read just under half. The back seat had a child's car seat in it. The car seat had a small stuffed rabbit in it. The Volvo had been left there in a hurry by people who had reasons. "We can siphon," Lennart said. "Then siphon. Fast." He went back to the UAZ for the hose. I stood watch. I was watching the road. I should have been watching the woods. The man came out of the woods on my blind side, on the right, where the slope was steep and the trees were close. He was not dead. He was living. He had a shotgun. He told me in a calm voice to put the rifle down. I did. I put it on the ground. I raised my hands. He told me to step away from the rifle. I did. He told me to call out to my friend. I did. Leonard came around the front of the Volvo with the hose in his hand. He stopped when he saw the shotgun. He set the hose down very carefully on the road. The man with the shotgun was about 50, gaunt, in a wool coat over a thermal shirt, with a beard that had not been trimmed in months and eyes that had not slept. He was alone. He told us he had been watching the Volvo for 3 days, waiting to see who would come. He told us he wanted the UAZ and the diesel and any food. He told us we could walk south. He told us he would not shoot us if we did what he said. Leonard, who had not raised his hands, said, "Friend, we are going to Wilhelmina for medicine for my friend's wife. She has an autoimmune disease. We will give you 20 liters of diesel and a kilo of beans and a hand axe. We will not give you the truck. We will not give you the rifle. We will walk away from this together and not see each other again. Or you can shoot one of us and the other one will kill you, and then nobody gets to Wilhelmina and a woman dies and you bleed out alone in this road. Choose now." The man with the shotgun did not move for what felt like a minute. Then he lowered the shotgun, not all the way, but to a port arms. He said, "The diesel, the beans, the axe, and one of your spare magazines." "No magazines," Leonard said, "but I will throw in a tin of coffee." "Coffee," the man said. "Yes." We did the trade. Leonard kept the shotgun in his peripheral vision the entire time. I kept the man in my peripheral vision the entire time. He did not shoot us. We did not shoot him. He walked back into the woods with the diesel and the beans and the axe and the coffee. We got back into the UAZ. Leonard drove with his hands shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline shedding off. Mine were shaking too. "That was stupid," I said after a few kilometers. "Which part?" "Stopping at the Volvo." "Yes," he said. "That was stupid. I will not do it again. Are you angry?" "No," I said. "I'm grateful. I would have driven around. We would not have had the diesel for the way back." "Yes," he said. "Sometimes the stupid thing is the right thing, but not often. I'm 63. I have used most of my stupid thing chances." We made it to Wilhelmina that night. We met Dr. Ekstrom in a parking lot behind a closed consume at 10 the next morning. He was a real doctor, and the medicine was real medicine. And we traded 80 liters of diesel and one of my chainsaw chains and a promise of future radio relay services for 6 months of Annika's specific medication and a smaller envelope of broad-spectrum antibiotics. We saw 3 dead on the road home, all standing, all dispatched at distance by Leonard, who shot better than I did. We saw 1 living group at a roadblock outside Storuman who let us pass after Leonard spoke to their leader in a voice I had not heard him use before. I do not know what he said. I did not ask. We came back on the evening of the 2nd day. Annika was on the porch in her coat with the rifle across her knees and Mira beside her with the dog and Johan in the doorway behind them. She did not get up when she saw the UAZ. She waited until I had walked to the porch and put the bag of medicine on her lap. Then she put her head against my stomach and cried for a long time, and Mira cried too, and Toffel pushed her head between us, and Johan went back inside to give us the porch. That was May 22nd of the 2nd year. I want to tell you that things got easier after that. They did not. They got different. In June, Lena got a fever. We thought for a horrible 36 hours that we had brought something back from Wilhelmina. We had not. It was tonsillitis, which we had treated with the broad-spectrum antibiotics I had traded for, and she recovered in 5 days. Johann did not sleep the entire time. Neither did I. In July, a group of 4 men came up the road. They were not desperate. They were the kind of men I had been afraid of since December. They had a working pickup truck with a snowplow blade on the front and a man with a rifle in the bed. They came up the road I had blocked with the spruce at kilometer 17, and they cleared the spruce, which took them 2 hours, and they came up to the bridge. And they stopped at the bridge because I had, 2 weeks earlier on Leonard's suggestion, pulled the decking on the middle span and stacked it in the woods. The bridge was passable on foot. It was not passable in a truck. They got out. They shouted up the valley. They could not see the house from the bridge. I could see them through the binoculars from a blind I had built in a stand of spruce on the ridge above the bridge in March. I had Johann with me. Lennart was at the house with Annika and Mira and Lena and the rifles, and Lennart's son, Anders, was on the opposite ridge with a hunting rifle and a clear shot at the bridge. The men shouted that they were from a settlement in Sorsele. They said they were collecting tribute from the valley properties. They said the tribute was 20% of food stores or equivalent, payable monthly, in exchange for protection from raiders. They said they knew there were people at the end of the road because they had been told by someone in Storuman. They said they would come back in a week with paperwork. We let them leave. They turned the truck around at the bridge. They drove back down the road. Johann, beside me in the blind, was shaking. I was shaking too. We had not fired a shot. We had not had to. We had also, in not firing, made a decision. We had decided not to start a war we could not finish in July when we had a winter coming. I called Lennart on the CB that night and we talked for an hour. We decided 3 things. 1, we would not pay tribute. 2, we would not run. 3, we would build, in the week we had, a defense that would convince the 4 men, when they returned, that the cost of taking Ostvik exceeded the value of taking Ostvik. I will not detail what we built. I will say only what mattered. We did not build a wall. We built the appearance of a manned, organized, hostile settlement. We cut firing lanes from the blind on the ridge. We staged dummy positions visible from the bridge. We strung a length of wire between 2 trees across the road at neck height for a man standing in the bed of a truck. We pre-positioned 3 fuel cans in the woods near the bridge that we could set alight remotely with a flare gun. And, most importantly, on Lennart's advice, we got on the CB 3 nights running on a frequency we knew the Sorsele group monitored, and we had conversations among ourselves. 4 different voices on 4 different evenings, calling each other Matthias and Lennart and Anders and Johann and Stig and Eric and Lars and Per, mentioning casualties from a recent encounter, mentioning ammunition reserves, mentioning a sniper who had once worked for the Hemvarnet, mentioning in passing that the road was mined past the bridge. We lied. We lied with detail and with consistency and with the calm tone of men who had done this before. We did not have a sniper. We did not have mines. We had a culvert inspector, a music teacher, a retired railway dispatcher, his son, 2 women, and a child. They came back on July 29th. They came in 2 trucks this time, with 7 men. They stopped at the bridge. They got out. They stood for a long time. Then their leader, a tall man in a green field jacket, walked alone to the middle of the bridge and shouted that he wanted to talk. Lennart went down to meet him. I covered Lennart from the blind. Unders covered him from the opposite ridge. Johan was on the radio with Annika at the house. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. I could not hear it. When Lennart walked back up the road, I came down from the blind and met him at the spring house. "They are not coming back," he said. "What did you tell them?" I told them we had been in contact with the Östersund government. I told them the Hemvärnet had identified our valley as a priority preservation site. I told them that any aggression against us would be logged and addressed within the year. I told them that if they left us alone, we would not log them. That's a lot of lies. Yes. Did he believe you? Lennart looked at me. He had aged 10 years since December. So had I. He said, he did not need to believe me. He needed to calculate that if I was telling the truth, the cost was too high, and if I was lying, the cost was still higher than they wanted to pay in July with winter coming. I gave him a reason to choose the easier path. They did not come back. I do not know what happened to them. I learned the following spring from a trader who came up the road with Dr. Ekstrom that the Sorcell group had been wiped out in October of that year by a different group from further south, and that the valleys north of Storuman had become known in the regional shorthand of survivors as Lennart's country. Lennart laughed when I told him. Then he stopped laughing and said, "That is not a good thing to be known as. That invites the next group. We will need to be careful." We were careful. The story I am telling you happens over 4 years. I cannot tell you all of it. I can tell you that in the second winter we took in 2 more people, a woman named Elin who had been a veterinary nurse and her teenage son Kalle, and Elin became Annika's closest friend in the time Annika had left. I can tell you that in the 3rd year Lennart's son Anders married a woman from a settlement in Tarnaby, and they built a cabin on the ridge above ours, and Ostvik became, in a quiet way, a village again. 11 people, then 13, then after a birth in the 4th spring, 14. I can tell you that Annika died in October of the 3rd year. She died in our bed in the main house with Mira holding one of her hands and me holding the other, and Toffel on the floor at the foot of the bed. She was 47. Her medication had kept her hands working and her hips moving and her pain manageable for 2.5 years longer than they would have otherwise. But the autoimmune thing was not what she died of. She died of a pneumonia that came on in 3 days and that we did not have the antibiotics for, because we had used the last of the antibiotics on Lena in June, when Lena had a kidney infection, and I had chosen not to make a second trip to Wilhelmina that summer because the roads were no longer safe. I want to be honest. I think about that choice every day. I think about whether I should have made the trip in August. I think about whether Annika would have lived. The honest answer is that I do not know. The honest answer is that the trip in August would have been dangerous and might have killed me, and then Annika would have died in October without me there. The honest answer is that you make these decisions with the information you have, and then you carry them. I will tell you what she said the night before she died, because I have not told anyone else, and because it is the thing I want most to leave on the record. She had been sleeping a lot in those last 3 days. Her breathing was a slow scrape. The fever had broken and then come back. Mira was downstairs with Elin. Johan was outside chopping wood because he did not know what else to do with his hands. I was sitting in the chair by the bed. Annika opened her eyes and looked at me clearly, the way she had looked at me the morning we signed the deed in Umeå, and she said, "Matthias, listen." I'm listening. You did not bring me up here to die. I came up here to live. There is a difference. Do not let yourself confuse them after I am gone. I won't. You will. You will confuse them in the first month. Then Mira will tell you the difference, and you will hear it because she is the one telling you. So, listen to her. Do you understand? Yes. And Matthias? Yes. The lingonberry jar from 2011. The one we ate the spoon of. I remember. Put up a jar every September, even when there are plenty, even when nobody needs it. Someone will eat it 12 years from now, and they will know we were here. That is what I want. That is enough. I said I would. I have. Every September, Mira and Lena and I, the three of us, do it together. We do 12 jars. One for each year that Ostvik was empty. Mira was 13 when her mother died. She's 15 now. She is the one who suggested last spring that we begin keeping a written history of Ostvik, beginning with the day we arrived, in case someone needed to know later what happened here. She has been writing it in a hardcover notebook in her mother's handwriting, which she has been practicing because she says she does not want her mother's handwriting to disappear. I want to tell you what Ostvik looks like now as I record this in the 4th autumn since we arrived. The main house has a new roof, which we did in the 2nd summer with cedar shake split on site by Johan and me. The barn has been fully rebuilt and houses 2 goats, 6 chickens, and a hand-built smokehouse. The smithy is a smithy again, because Anders learned blacksmithing from a book his father had owned for 30 years, and he makes hinges and nails and, last winter, a working snare trap mechanism that has fed us venison through 3 winters. The byre, the 4th building, has been re-roofed and is now Elin and Carly's home. We have built 3 new structures, a sauna by the pond, a workshop next to the smithy, and a small chapel where Annika is buried in a plot marked by a stone with her name and her dates carved by Anders. We have not seen a dead person on the road since the 2nd winter. We have not seen a living group since the 3rd summer. We are not alone in Sweden. The Östersund government, what is left of it, broadcasts on shortwave once a week and tells us that there are an estimated 412,000 people alive in the country, mostly in the inland north, mostly in clusters like ours. We are listed as one of the clusters, Lennart's country. Mira is 15. Lena is 13. They are the future of Ostvik, and they know it, and they do not yet hate the weight of it. Mira can run a chainsaw and split wood and shoot a rifle and dress a deer and read 3 languages. Lena is the gardener of the village. She has tripled our potato yield in 2 years through obsessive selection. Kalia, the teenager, is 16 now and has become, of all of us, the best at the radio. He talks every Tuesday and Friday to Dr. Ekstrom, who is still alive in Wilhelmina, and who tells us what is happening in the world. Johan plays the accordion on Saturday evenings in the kitchen of the main house, and the whole village comes, and we eat together, and we sing, and afterwards I go up to the chapel and tell Annika about the week. I want to end with 2 things. The first is what I learned. I learned that competence is not enough. I learned that you can do everything right, and trace every pipe, and stock every shelf, and inspect every culvert, and your wife will still die because the world has stopped making antibiotics. Competence is the floor. It is not the roof. The roof is the people you let in, and the people who let you in. I would not be alive without Lennart. Mira would not be alive without Johan. Lena would not be alive without Annika. None of us would be alive without the others. The competence got us to the table. The people kept us at the table. The second is what I did not learn until last week, and what is the reason I'm recording this now, and not a year ago when Mira first asked me to. Last Tuesday, on the shortwave, a man came on the regional frequency at an off hour, when he should not have been there. He said he was broadcasting from a research station on Svalbard, which is 2,000 kilometers north of us, in the Arctic. He said the station had a population of 19, all healthy, all originally from the seed vault and meteorological operations, all sealed in since the first month of the outbreak. He said they had been monitoring radio traffic in Scandinavia for 4 years. He said they had identified clusters. He said they were planning, in the spring, to send a vessel south along the coast to make contact with the largest clusters and to begin coordinating a long-term plan. He said our cluster was on his list. He said he would call again next Tuesday. I have not told Mira yet. I have not told Johan yet. I have told Lennart, who said only, "We will talk about it before next Tuesday. Do not decide anything yet." I do not know what we will do. I do not know whether the Svalbard station is what it says it is. I do not know whether contact with them means rescue, or means exposure, or means something else I cannot yet name. I do not know whether Ostvik should remain a hidden valley, or become a node in a larger network. I do not know whether Mira's future is here, holding what we built, or out there, building something new. What I know is that on Tuesday at the off hour, I will be at the radio. Johan will be beside me. Lennart will be on the line from Gran Leiden. Mira will be at the kitchen table with her notebook, writing it down, and the spring behind the house will keep running at 11 liters per minute, 4 degrees Celsius, the way it has run since 1907, the way it will run after I am gone. That is what Osvik is. That is what I bought, 12 years empty, 4 buildings standing on the second Saturday in October of the year the world ended. I did not know what I was buying. I'm still finding out. I will tell you what happens next Tuesday, listener, if I am still here to tell it. If I am not, Mira will. She has been practicing her mother's handwriting, and she is almost ready.